Hello and welcome to the Avtec training videos. My name is Dan O'Brien and I've spent the better part of 20 years at Motorola working with channel partners on different radio and console systems. Many of you know the MCC 5500 is no longer being sold by Motorola and the Avtec Scout is its official replacement. Today we'll be taking a look at both consoles so that you can explain the differences to customers who may be looking at transitioning from one to the other. We'll be talking about three major areas today: the physical hardware, the IP network, and the screens that the dispatchers actually use to do their job. We're not going to take you through the full configuration of a Scout console. The Scout Administration and Maintenance class is where you should go for that level of detail. But rather, we'll be covering the things that an end user would likely be interested in. Let's get started. The first and most obvious difference between the Scout and the MCC 5500 to the end user is in the dispatch position hardware. Each MCC 5500 position consists of a PC and proprietary audio processing hardware called the Console Audio Box or CAB. The CAB provides all the audio connections to the dispatcher, along with connections for foot switches, I/O relays, phone directors, and logging recorders. The Scout also had a similar dedicated audio hardware box called the Hardware Media Workstation, but that has since been replaced with a Software Media Workstation that allows us to make all the same connections through USB ports directly to the dispatch position PC. This software approach reduces our footprint at the dispatch position, where space is at a premium, gives us more flexibility on the dispatch installation, allows us to use commercial off-the-shelf USB audio equipment like speakers and microphones, and probably most importantly, the software approach allows us to easily create mobile consoles by installing the software on a laptop or Windows-based tablet, which is ideal for emergency situations or remote or mobile dispatching centers. On the MCC 5500, the CAB is connected through a cable or pair of modems to a console electronics shelf or CES in the back room. Each CAB at the dispatch position has to have a corresponding CES, which limits the MCC 5500 to a total of 36 dispatch positions. The connection between the CAB and CES also either limited the distance between the two or increased the hardware costs due to the required modems. The CES housed subcomponents called the console processor, digital audio processor, and power supply unit. A fully loaded MCC 5500 can support a total of 36 console positions, 128 channels, and 72 phone lines. The proprietary CAB and CES combination, while very robust, limited the installation possibilities of the console and reduced options for redundancy. The Scout console has taken all that backroom hardware, converted it to software called the VP Gate, and installed it on a pair of off-the-shelf servers for redundancy. The VP Gate then connects via IP directly to many land mobile radio architectures. This wireline connection gives Scout a significant advantage over the MCC 5500, which only had a wireless connection for trunking systems. If needed, the Scout can also connect through an outpost gateway to base stations, consolettes, or mobile radios. The outpost can be placed anywhere on the customer's IP network and converts between IP and tone remote, DC, E&M, or whatever native protocol that the LMR system or radio speaks. The VP Gate architecture of the Scout allows us to have, in the largest configurations, up to 800 dispatch consoles and 2,000 different channels or endpoints. These endpoints can be licensed to support any combination of radios, telephone lines, or I/O relays. As a side note, the VP Gate is also a key component of the new Access console, so a customer can start with a single position Scout and evolve on that path to the latest Motorola consoles as they grow or their needs change. This brings us to the second big difference between the MCC 5500 and the Avtec Scout. Where an MCC 5500 would use a dedicated circuit to run voice and data traffic from, let's say, a control station to the DAP and the CES, a second dedicated T3 circuit to route audio between the CES shelves, and more dedicated circuits to get it out to the dispatch positions, the Scout console accomplishes all of this via IP networks. Because Scout uses an IP-based architecture, we now have the flexibility to place consoles, VP gates, and outposts almost anywhere the customer has an IP connection. This means we can place dispatch consoles and VP gates in different rooms, on different floors, or in different buildings across the country as needed. For smaller customers, for example, a single pair of VP gates can be used to serve both a main and backup dispatch center to reduce hardware and configuration costs. For cost-conscious customers, the VP gate can also be loaded on the dispatch position PCs, which reduces the cost of the system and the overall hardware footprint. A critical piece to remember about the Scout dispatch positions in VP gates is that they use multicast to minimize the traffic across the IP backbone. Most IT departments in medium to large organizations will be familiar with routing multicast traffic, so it shouldn't be an issue. For smaller customers, however, there may be some additional work needed during the pre-installation phase of the project to bring the IT folks up to speed. There are several resources available through the internet or on the Avtec Connect website to help with that discussion. Additionally, in situations where multicast routing isn't an option, Avtec has another software component called Frontier that allows the VP gate and console positions to talk via unicast. We'll be creating another video that specifically deals with the mobile consoles and Frontier later on. Because the Scout console is using off-the-shelf PCs, servers, routers, and switches, the end customer and their IT department has a lot more flexibility to determine their levels of redundancy and spares. This brings us to the actual dispatch position software, which is where most end users and supervisors will spend their time. Motorola has been in the dispatch console business since 1939 when we rolled out the P280 console, and much of the design behind the MCC 5500 has evolved from that time. Because Motorola has traditionally been in the land mobile radio business, with public safety customers being a particular focus, much of the console design is aimed at addressing that market. Two-way voice radio is the most important part of a public safety dispatch position, with paging coming in a close second. Telephony, while important, does not play as large a role. Likewise, as can be expected from any manufacturer of LMR systems, the MCC 5500 is designed specifically to work well with Motorola public safety radio systems. All of that thinking can be clearly seen in an MCC 5500 dispatch position GUI that limits the options of supervisors and dispatchers, specifically to keep LMR voice front and center in the dispatcher's work area. Color schemes, backgrounds, button placement, sounds, and button functionality have all been limited and optimized to ease the workload of a public safety dispatcher, as well as mimic the previous generation of Motorola consoles to reduce training time. The Scout, on the other hand, has a different heritage, and because of this, gives the dispatcher a lot more flexibility in both functionality as well as look and feel. Since Avtec serves many markets and many different LMR manufacturers, the Scout does not dictate what functionality should be the focus. For some customers, like utilities, telephony is as important or more important than radio, so Scout allows you to create telephone line pads that are at least as sophisticated as the radio versions. Buttons for placing calls on hold, muting, transferring, and forwarding calls all have a place on the Scout console. An automatic number identifier, or caller ID, have special tools or windows inside the GUI for those customers that need them. The VP gate can interface with dozens of different kinds of endpoints from different manufacturers, and there are settings at the dispatch position to optimize the dispatcher's workflow for all of them. This means that the learning curve to properly configure a Scout console is much steeper than for an MCC 5500, but the end result is a console system that can be uniquely tailored to the needs and desires of a customer, or even a specific dispatcher. Let's look at some of the different ways a Scout console screen can be configured. Here's a typical example of an MCC 5500 screen for a small sheriff's department, with line pads for radio, telephony, and call director. This is what it looks like after an upgrade to the Scout. The same functionality is there, but we've moved buttons around and changed the colors to make it easier on the dispatcher's eyes in darker environments. Here's an example where we divided the screen between radio line pads and function buttons on the left from telephony line pads and buttons on the right. Because we can change the size and shape of the pads and buttons, we have greater flexibility to customize the screen. Similar to the MCC 5500, we can also split telephony and radio onto separate tabs. Here's an example of a fire department that has a splashier screen and used graphics to indicate what the various aux.io buttons control and their current status. It not only looks nice, but also improves the dispatcher's situational awareness. And lastly, this is another example of a customer who is using backgrounds and button placement to improve dispatcher awareness. In this case, they've put a map in the background and placed their radio line pads at their corresponding locations on the map. This helps the dispatcher know exactly who and where they are dispatching. In conclusion, while the MCC 5500 and Scout console are similar in their overall architecture and reliability, we think you will find that the Scout gives you and your customer many more options when it comes to hardware, redundancy, and configuration. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any comments or questions about this or any other Avtec video, or you have ideas for future videos, please feel free to contact me at dobrien@avtecinc.com.